Hello everyone, March W13 here in my Lanai Suite at the Cosmopolitan Las Vegas. And I've just ordered takeout from one of my favorite restaurants in Las Vegas. It's called China Poblano. It is a José Andrés restaurant, and it bills itself as somewhat of a Chinese-Mexican fusion, although it's really a Chinese restaurant and a Mexican restaurant sort of coexisting with a healthy selection of Chinese dishes and some Mexican dishes. And I've sort of ordered in tonight. I'm gonna watch some football here and we'll taste some of this food. Now, most of these dishes I have not had before, so we'll be tasting them for the first time together. And I believe this dish here is called China's Sweetest Tomatoes. I think this is the young coconut ceviche. This is the Dan Dan Mian noodles, the huevos rancheros, and this is called When Pigs Fly. Let's go ahead and dig in. We'll taste each dish, provide some commentary, and we'll go from there. Now, again, this first dish is called Chinese Sweetest Tomatoes, and it's described as heirloom tomato with Chinese rice vinegar mint and blended with rock sugar. So this should be interesting. I'm gonna tuck in here and we'll talk about it. Honestly, I found it quite underwhelming for the price. The heirloom tomato is fine. There's nothing particularly remarkable or impactful about the vinegar, mint, and sugar sauce, if you will. It's all rather weak and I think even perhaps lacking in seasoning. So if I had to rate this on a scale from 1 to 10, I think I'd have to give it a 4 or a 5. But again, it is somewhat as advertised in that it is heirloom tomatoes with vinegar, mint, and sugar. I suppose I was picturing it as almost candied, but it is nothing of the sort. Now, moving on to the young coconut ceviche, which I'm sure is far more beautifully presented if you eat it in restaurant. It's described as young coconut, and you can see pieces of coconut flesh at the bottom. And of course, ceviche is just basically flesh cooked in acid. Normally the flesh is the flesh of fish, but in this case, it's the flesh of a coconut. But it's young coconut with avocado, teardrop pepper, you can see the red teardrops there, onion, presumably red onion, and cilantro dressed with fresh coconut water, which is down there in the bottom, and citrus juices. So we'll dig in. Wow, that's really amazing. It somehow manages to be both light and quite substantive at the same time. The flesh of the coconut obviously is filled with, I don't know what they call it, polyunsaturated fats. And so you get some quasi-meatiness from that flesh, but yet it is supremely refreshing. The creamy elements, which are the coconut and the avocado, are cut through by the acidic elements, the citrus juices, and I'm not a huge onion person, but the contrasting bite of the onion and cilantro really set it off quite nicely. So for this, if you like everything I've described, I would probably give this at least an 8 out of 10. And probably have to give a bonus point for uniqueness, so we'll give it a 9. Moving on to the Dan Dan Mian noodles. This is José's take on the original Chinese street classic, hand-cut wheat noodles with a rich Szechuan ground pork sauce, toasted peanuts, cilantro, and chili Pekin, finished with Chinkian vinegar. So we'll see if it is truly a twist. The sauce is quite dark, peanutty, and rich and thick. It's almost like a mole. Perhaps that's where the Chinese-Mexican fusion part comes into play. It's not terribly porky, and it's not nearly as spicy as I expected. And of course, this takeout food, so the noodles have begun to kind of coagulate and stick together. But I'm happy with this dish in that it seems to be a somewhat innovative play on the classic as it portends. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this maybe a 7.5 out of 10. Pretty decent. And I'd say that the peanuts are rather unobtrusive, but they provide a decent textural contrast. There are perhaps a few too many of them. I may revise my opinion as I eat more. Next up, we have the huevos rancheros, which consist of heirloom corn tortillas, 2 sunny side up eggs, salsa roja, queso fresco, refried beans, and avocado. Let's see if it delivers on that promise. Well, the eggs, as you can see, are probably more just beyond over medium than over easy, which is fine by me, particularly when I'm traveling. Don't want to eat raw egg. But this is a fairly good dish. The heirloom corn tortillas have that indescribable fresh masa taste, and the various elements, the eggs, the salsa roja, and the refried beans harmonize relatively well together, but there's just this sort of bitter aftertaste. I'm not quite sure what it is that detracts from the dish significantly, I would say. I didn't try a bite with the avocado. I'm sure the avocado would add that extra boost of creaminess that I think I'm looking for. And I'll be honest, I didn't get much queso fresco in my bite either. So I may change my mind about this, but given the bitter note that I detected, I'm gonna have to give this maybe a 6.5 out of 10. Last but not least, we have When Pigs Fly, which is just delicate steamed buns with Chinese barbecue pork. So it is José Andrés' take on char siu bao. And perhaps not unpredictably, given that this is, I think of all the dishes, the only really meat-forward course, this is by far the best of them all. The dough is perfectly cooked, and it has some element, maybe it's a slightly saltier, more savory element that really makes the dough stand out. But the filling, as you can see, is extremely saucy, and it's not offensively fatty. It's just really, really juicy and succulent. So I'm gonna have to give this one a 9.5 out of 10. José Andrés' take on a char siu bao is quite impressive. So I guess that does it for now for this brief review of takeout from China Poblano at the Cosmopolitan Las Vegas. Overall, I'd say the food held up pretty well. It was packaged well, and it survived the journey from the restaurant up to my room, with the exception of maybe the dan dan noodles that started to sort of clump together. I think they could do maybe a better job of mixing the sauce with the noodles or something like that. But I have really very few complaints. There were obviously some hits and a few minor misses. Overall, I would give this probably an 8.5 out of 10. And I highly recommend eating China Poblano at the restaurant. But if you can't do that, then takeout is the next best thing. And particularly if you have food and beverage credits or comps to burn, this is a great option, especially if you have a room like this and you can sit down and enjoy some football or your favorite movie with your family and friends. Until next time, good health, good eats. Marsh W13 out.